Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. In today's episode, we're talking about SEO for WordPress, how you organize your content in WordPress. Content marketing is huge. WordPress is huge. Posts, pages, custom post types. How do you organize this stuff in your navigation and your sitemaps? Conrad O'Connell joins us today to talk about that very thing, set you up for your best possible chance to win in this SEO world. And he has a strong knowledge in SEO, but a wealth of knowledge in the vacation rental property space, bed and breakfast, inns, small hotels. That's where he spends most of his time optimizing sites for those types of clients. And he does a fantastic job if you follow him on Twitter. And I'll link his Twitter bio in the description. He's got just a wealth of knowledge about this stuff. And he created this presentation specifically for the Matt Report audience and specifically for how to win and succeed in WordPress. It's not the only CMS that he uses, but it's one that he has just a wide range of knowledge on with his clients and his own sort of work in this space. So I'm excited to get this out. Let's get right into the video. If you enjoy this stuff, go ahead and thumbs up. If you want more of this stuff, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. It's mattreport.com, mattreport.com/subscribe to join the mailing list. Let's get going.
Cool. Yeah. So, we kind of touched on some of this before, but I would say the thing that I get asked first, most commonly, is like, I want to add, I use the term content and information interchangeably, just because there are times throughout the day where I get tired of hearing the word content over and over, but people most resonate with that. So if I use the word information or content interchangeably, I mean the same thing. I just want to preface with that. But the question I get asked most frequently, and this is, across the years of all different types of clients I've worked with, is, what's the best way for me to add new content to my site? Should I be using posts? Should I be using pages? And is there an SEO impact? So, just kind of mention kind of some of the drawbacks of using posts in some ways, right? It's tied to a date, right? A page doesn't have a date. A post does. When we add it to our site, it's going to be organized chronologically by default. We're going to see the newest post first, the oldest post last, that sort of thing. So sometimes, clients are encouraged to create posts. They hear like, you should be blogging. So they use the WordPress parlance and add new posts to their blog, and they think that's doing the right thing. But in my opinion and in my experience, there really isn't an impact between creating that information or content and putting it on a post and creating that content and information and putting it on a page. It's more just about how you want to organize it and what's the best way for your business. There's definitely examples where on my own site, for example, I write about like events that I attend. Well, an event has a specific date tied to it. There would really be no better way to, approach that type of information than to put it in a post that has a date on it where I talk about recapping a certain event. So I think that a little bit of experimentation is probably healthy here, kind of figuring out what may be best for you. But I would say that don't be afraid to put something into a page, even if your competitors are putting it in posts. Sometimes that can be a good way to organize it in a better way or to present it in a better way, especially if something is a little more, I do think this word is overused, but I think it's applicable here, evergreen. If you write a piece of information that you're updating constantly, a good example might be the Yoast SEO guide for WordPress. That's a page that they update all the time. Then they have like a different section of the site on the Yoast site where they update and they talk about like new features they're adding to their plugin, and those are posts. I think that you can kind of, use both of these interchangeably depending on what you want to accomplish. But a lot of time you can kind of use the pages, in my experience, sometimes people just use pages for about and contact and that sort of thing. And I don't think you should be afraid to put, new information, new content on those. So I'd say that's the first question I get asked. What's the difference between these? Should I use one? Is one better than the other for SEO? And in my opinion, it really isn't. I think that both can rank equally well. I've had examples where I've moved even content from one to the other for whatever reason, and there's been no change, no impact in rankings. If anything, sometimes going and updating it has actually increased the rankings and traffic a little bit. So I'd say that's kind of the first thing to talk about is how do I want to add new information to the site? And if you're doing it in pages, you may want to consider more of like a parent-child relationship. And if you're doing it in posts, you may want to consider more on the category tag relationship. Do I want to use categories? Do I want to use tags? Do I want to use both? And what's the best way for me to do that? So let's say you've decided, kind of a path that makes sense for you depending on the type of site and the type of information or content that you're posting. I think that sometimes the next thing that you may hear some SEO debate about is people talking about the structure of a site and how you should kind of construct or put together the URLs in the most SEO friendly way possible. And I like these debates because, you'll see SEO people kind of fighting and arguing about it. And in the wild, in the real world, you'll find sites that have both lots of structure and very flat sites, or sites where almost every single page is right on the root. And sometimes they both rank equally well. So a good example might be in the real estate space, if anyone's listening is in that space, or if you as a consumer have seen this, Trulia and Zillow both rank really well for real estate searches, as does Realtor.com. If you go and look at their URL structure, though, they almost couldn't be more different. Like Zillow has like the flattest, URL structure you can have. It's Zillow.com, and then the name of the city or the name of the area that you're targeting. And then if you go and look at Realtor.com, they have their pages organized in a very structured way. It'll be like Realtor.com/Massachusetts/Boston, that sort of thing. And in the space that I work in, the example might be looking at a site like Flipkey, which is very flat. Every page is like right on the root. So it'll be like, flipkey.com/places/Boston. Whereas a site like VRBO will have lots of structure to it. So it'll be vrbo.com/USA/Northeast/Massachusetts/Boston. So I think people, again, get very worried about this. They want to know what the best thing to do is. And when you'll hear one SEO tell you this, another person who works in SEO tell you that. And then you go look at sites that actually rank well in the wild, and they use both strategies. So I don't think you're harming yourself if you pick one either way. In my opinion, I like to have a hybrid approach. So when I have some people will include like post ID, that sort of thing. So that's not how I prefer to do it. I prefer to have it like the name, domain.com/blog, and then the name of that post that we're writing. The same could be said for pages. So assuming that WordPress is just installed on the root, it's domain.com, and then we have a page called, let's say, things to do. That's just right on the root. So now what you may want to consider is how you do structure it if you do a subtopic. So for example, let's say you had, for my client, it might be you're doing a guide on things to do, and then you are going after long tail keywords that people are searching after they search things to do. So my example here is typically someone may search things to do in Boston. That's maybe is like your top level page. Then someone may search something like things to do in Boston on a rainy day. Well, that could be a good example of where you'd want to include a child page or kind of a subtopic, if you will, under that main things to do page that specifically calls out or only calls out the things that you can do in Boston on a rainy day. So that could be kind of a subtopic or category that you use, and then you set the things to do page as the parent page and your rainy day page as a child page. Certainly there's a lot of examples. We were using lawyers before. So let's say you have different practices that the lawyers engaged with. Maybe you have a primary parent page that's called like practices, all the different types of legal issues that that lawyer could help you with, whether it was divorce or taxes or whatever the case may be. And then you may want to have subtopics underneath each one of those. So not just taxes, but I can help you with a real estate foreclosure. Maybe that's a subtopic after just looking at a parent page that talks about real estate. So that may be an example where you'd have a little bit of structure to the site where you have a parent page for all the different legal services that lawyers engaging in. Then you have a subpage for real estate, and then different subpages for like, maybe longer tail keywords that you've researched and you've identified to get very long, almost unwieldy. I think that can sometimes hurt you if you don't have a lot of kind of authority or something, and you're going up against sites that are putting a lot of those pages on the root. Google may sometimes prefer to show those shorter URLs in search. So have like anything, have some kind of it's all in context, all in reason in terms of how you want to structure it. And you certainly don't want to be creating lots and lots of pages on the site that are very thin and don't have much information on them. But I think there's plenty of examples of where you'd want to assemble, a site that you put together that has 2 or 3 layers, even a small business, medium-sized business that you're working with, that has a structure that makes sense to you. Sometimes these flat sites that I work on where everything is just piled straight on the root, it's just a pain to kind of organize and look after, because it's like you're dealing with a bunch of straws. They're all the same size and you're trying to line them up properly. So having a little bit of structure to those URLs makes sense in my mind. I think the best way to do that is to have a separate subfolder for your blog, and then have those pages live under there, and then having a few areas of your site, depending on the primary focus of the business, where you're kind of setting those things up in that way too. So that's kind of an important, kind of the second most common thing I get asked is, okay, let's say I've mapped out my site. And what's actually really helpful here as well, it wasn't something I covered at the top, but it's something that can be helpful here as well, is to almost map out the site, whether it's a redesign or whether it's a brand new site, on something archaic like pen and paper before you actually go and create the site and start to like build it in the actual WordPress backend. I think that Pat Flynn had this example where he talked about all the topics that he was building a new site on, and he took like Post-it notes and wrote all the different topics and then just put them on a table first before he even went through and tried to organize and figure out where something was going to go. I think an exercise like that on paper or talking with your client, or if it's your own site, just thinking out loud and talking to maybe a partner you have with it and kind of figuring out how to organize it can be a very helpful exercise before you actually go and do it. Because certainly what you want to avoid on the SEO end is you really want to avoid doing a lot of redirects once you've established a certain structure. So, although, what Google tells you is that you lose minimal or you don't lose any, SEO value when you do any sort of redirects, in my experience, it can always cause issues for whatever reason. And you want to avoid doing redirect if you don't have to. So if you have to, you have to, and that's part of the process. Certainly, whenever you're moving sites from one CMS to WordPress, you may have to do redirects, of course, to prevent broken pages. But if you're building a new site, or you're building an existing redesign, you're redesigning an existing WordPress site, and you want to avoid kind of redoing the whole structure, it may make sense to keep some things similar, keep some things the same. So setting it up properly from the beginning kind of helps you, in my opinion, when you go through and do that different child pages or you do redo different topics and that sort of thing. So the last thing is, let's say you wanted to do, like I think that one thing that, it kind of comes up no matter which type of client I'm working with on a WordPress site is like, how do we organize different custom post types that we may have? So, let's say that you're, maybe we'll use a doctor example this time. I know Matt and I, a minute ago, we were talking about like plastic surgeons, for example. Well, they may want to have a custom post type for like an image gallery showing like before and after the surgery sort of thing. You may want to have a custom post type for testimonials, that sort of thing. So I think that it's better to have like a defined way that you're assembling these pages and putting them together. And if you're going to add, in our slides, we have an example where let's say we're going to set up 20 pieces of content. How would we want to organize and structure that so that it was going to help us, in the best way possible? I think it's by just kind of looking through and deciding those topics first, and then figuring out what templates or what information you want to put on that page and deciding what would be the best way to do that. So, I mentioned hubs here. What I mean by hub is kind of like what we were talking about before, using a plugin like Matt's Conductor plugin, or in my example, I was using Content Views Pro, and creating these like hubs of information that you could use, or these parent pages that collect a lot of other pages underneath them that are valuable for you. So, in my experience, what I have found is that even if that main category page that you have, whether it's a normal WordPress category page or something that you've customized or made a little bit more unique in some way, doesn't rank well in search, I think everything that you put on your site is kind of like a little bit of a relevancy signal to Google about what your site's about. So some SEOs will tell you, like, if you have a page that's not getting much organic traffic, maybe you should consider removing it or taking it off your site. I don't always agree with that. I think there's some cases where that, may be the case. Let's say you have very old information on your site that people are no longer visiting. But I think that having a structure to your site and having pages that organize all of your other pages gives Google kind of some context or some heads up, if you will, about what all those pages are about. So, there's definitely pages on my site that don't get much organic traffic. There's some of my clients I work with have pages that don't get much organic traffic, but they end up with a lot of visitors who come from organic traffic because of how they navigate around the website. So I think that's something you want to think about too, is how do I want to organize my content? Is it just going to be date-based? Because in a lot of cases, like we were talking about before, Matt, just because you wrote something 2 years ago does not mean it's not as relevant today as it was 2 years ago. So why would you want to hide that so deep into the site? Why would you want that to be on, domain.com/blog/page/6? If it's a valuable page, you want to put that, or a valuable post, you want to put that kind of right front and center so people can look at it. It's often the case that I'll look at a brand new site that I've never worked on before, go into the all pages section in Google Analytics, and I'll find that their most popular page wasn't one that they did in the last 3 months. It was one that they may have done months or even years ago in some cases, and yet that page is still getting organic traffic today. Sometimes it's their highest converting page, maybe after their homepage. So I think that when you organize things based on what people are looking for and the topics, you're going to do a better job than most people who just organize based on, oh, I had time to write a blog post today, so I put one up. And now that I haven't written anything for a few months, it just looks like, there's nothing on my site for anyone. I'll give you a good example here. So there's a site by a marketer named Brennan Dunn. He runs a website called Freelancing. I think he has personally one of the best examples I've seen of assembling topics on his site. And the reason that I say that is when you go there, he has like specific outcomes that you're trying to achieve, and you can go to each one of these and kind of use it as an example for what you want to achieve in there. And these are all posts; they all have dates on them, that sort of thing. But he pushes you into these topic pages that do a great job of organizing all the information he's written over time and give you a good way to kind of read through and digest them. So if you kind of want to see an example of what I'm talking about, I think that would be a good example.
So I actually just pulled up the his example page real quick so people could see that.
I think that would be awesome. Yeah. And again, if you're listening, if you go to wfreelancing.com, I mean, not to get off on a tangent here, but I think his stuff is some of the most helpful information out there for people who are, hoping to go solo or in the space that I'm in and want to, do it on their own. But yeah, if you just look at how he's organized the topics on his site, I think that's I don't think you could do it much better than that. So I think a lot of sites could duplicate that idea. Of course, the clients you have are probably vastly different in terms of the types of content they're posting. That's fine. But I think you could duplicate some of those ideas and do really well with them. Okay, so the next slide I want to talk about, so this is something that comes up all the time, is like how many plugins should I have? Or sometimes I'll log into a client site for the first time and they'll have 55 different plugins installed, and certainly some of them aren't SEO relevant to SEO, and some of them are. But in my opinion, there's a lot of sites where I literally just use these 2 plugins, and there's a lot of sites where I literally just have the first plugin that I'm going to mention, and that's it. And we do really well. We get tons of organic traffic from them. In some cases, it's because the host or the agency that's hosting that site doesn't let us install other plugins, so it's more out of necessity sometimes than because of some minimalism philosophy. But I try to keep the sites as light as possible. Speed being kind of a ranking factor, and even if it's not a ranking factor, why would you want to make your website slow? I don't care if it has nothing to do with SEO. I think that you have to think about if there's ways to make your website faster by removing plugins that you're not using, you should be doing that regardless of Google or anything, because people want to look at fast sites. They're going to stay on fast sites longer and look at more pages on your site, which is ultimately what you want. So first plugin, Yoast SEO. Certainly there's competing SEO plugins out there. I've used a handful of them here and there, but I think that one's, I really don't think you can do any better than that. They're constantly adding new features. There's never been a site that it hasn't worked, or a theme or a framework or anything that it hasn't worked well for me. And it checks all the boxes that 99% of sites need to do, 90% of the time. So it does your sitemaps. It helps you, kind of with your on-page SEO. It's not going to do it for you, but it helps you, let you know if you're doing it properly. Helps you when you set up your title tag templates. And the best thing is it kind of does a lot of this out of the box. So by installing it, you've kind of done, a few things that, most people would say are best practices, without really much configuration, which I think is very helpful. And then the next one, so this is just something that I think is helpful for an internal linking perspective, is I like to use the plugin called Contextual Related Posts. You could also use the Jetpack version of this. They have like a related post plugin for Jetpack as well. I think that would work well for most people. But I think that that's a very helpful exercise. Once you start to get a lot of organic traffic to your blog, you don't want to lose someone when they stop to finish that article. So I think that, an SEO like growth strategy for some sites that are maybe a little bit more established and already getting lots of organic traffic could just be to figure out, okay, let's pretend we can't get one additional visitor from Google. How would we get them to stay on the website longer and look at more pages? I think using some of these related post plugins and just lots of internal linking that you do throughout that post or that page that people have landed on is like the simplest, most SEO, like it's going to help your SEO, but it's also just going to get people to stay on the site longer and engage with you, which is ultimately, what should be the goal, of course, when you're, building a lot of content on the site. So I think that you could run with those 2 plugins. I have sites that are just using Yoast SEO and are getting 10, 15, 20,000 visitors a month from Google just for the blog posts that we've written over time. Like we talked about earlier, Matt, the WordPress platform today is, I think, really good out of the box for SEO. You could probably run no plugins, and still do a lot of things right and get traffic. So there's nothing in the framework itself. There's nothing in the CMS itself that's like limiting you. As long as there's things that aren't, broken, as long as your title tags are pulling through properly, that sort of thing, then I think you can pretty much go plugin light and really just use 1 or 2 and get a lot of benefits from what you would typically want to do on a site most sites, and get a lot of benefit there. And just some non-plugin SEO related areas that I see come up frequently that may be worth reviewing. We talked about permalinks before. My preference is to always just use the post name or the name of the page, and then have a little bit of structure to it. So all the blog posts are housed under /blog or housed under /articles or something like that. So make sure that those are kind of been reviewed. Again, if you're on an existing site, be very careful before you go and change permalinks. WordPress is supposed to redirect them if you decide to change them at some point. I found that there's a little like ghost in that code that they've written, because sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. May depend on your host, that sort of thing. But before you go and change permalinks on an established site, make sure you have a backup, and if needed, a plan to migrate all those URLs before you hit that button. But again, I prefer to just use post name for my permalinks. I think that's the most SEO friendly option that there is out there. Site name. So this one is rarely overlooked, but I see it every once in a while. When you install Yoast, what they're going to do is they're going to use the title of the post, and then there's going to be a little bit of a separator, and then they're going to insert that site name at the end of your title tag, which is kind of one of the most important on-page SEO things you're going to do on a WordPress site. And sometimes I see people with these very long, like verbose site names that are like 800 characters long, and they don't really even describe what the site's about, that sort of thing. So just do a quick review of that whenever you install the Yoast SEO plugin, or if you have an existing site and you haven't looked at your site name in a while. Like if you're trying to stuff a lot of keywords in there and Google just keeps cutting it off and trimming it, or like every title tag you look at in the actual Google search results keeps getting rewritten because your site name is just awkward and Google doesn't want to show it, I think that's a little bit of a bad sign. So you may want to take a look at that and just kind of make sure that it fits your brand. Like for me, on my site, it's on my personal site, it's just my name. And on my agency site, it's just the name of my agency. I think that's the best way to do it. I wouldn't recommend that sometimes I'll see clients or sites that I'll look at, and they'll have the name of the post, and they'll have the site name will be like the main keyword they're trying to optimize for. So it'll be like, we'll write a post about like, here are the best seafood restaurants in Boston, and then there'll be the separator, and then their site name is something like, Boston Vacation Rentals or something, even though the name of their company is something different. So don't try to keyword stuff in there. Just keep it on brand, keep it consistent. And if you're using the Yoast SEO plugin, you're going to benefit from, once you install that, it's going to be put across all your pages and posts. So you want to make sure that that's something that's logical and makes sense. The next thing comes up every once in a while. WordPress does a pretty good job at it, but what you may want to double check and make sure everything is working properly is a www or a non-www redirect. You want to make sure that these are set up properly. Again, people ask, what's the best one for SEO? Should you have it with or without the www? Again, in my opinion, it does not matter. My advice is to whichever one you have, stick with it. So don't switch it unless for some reason you absolutely have to. So if you have an existing site and it's been indexed under non-www, then just stick with that, even if you do a redesign in the future, even if you switch CMSs. I think, in my opinion, whenever you can limit redirects, that's always the best practice SEO-wise. So I would highly recommend you just keep that what it is, but just make sure that that both aren't being indexed by Google. That does happen sometimes. And make sure that use a tool like http://status.io to make sure that whatever you're looking at in there is actually returning a 301 redirect, and that people aren't seeing two different versions of the site, or there's not two different versions of the site indexed, one with www and one without. SSL. So this can be something, actually, I sent a tweet yesterday. It was kind of a mean one, because I think people are being a little misleading about the benefits of SSL for SEO and for ranking specifically. So I think Google has said, Gary Iles has said, SSL is like a tiebreaker. So if you have two sites and for whatever reason they have all the same attributes, or like a page rank or authority, that sort of thing, that the one with SSL may outrank the one without it if everything else is the same. I've now gone through the process on about a dozen sites of doing an SSL migration from non-secure to secure. And I do think now that Google has it nailed down where you won't lose traffic. I do not think that was the case a year and a half ago, despite what they would say. I did a few during that time, and we consistently lost about 10 to 15% of our organic traffic. But I've done a few. Yeah, and it was a pain because you basically did what they told you to do, right? And this is, without getting too far off topic, this is something that happens sometimes. Google will tell you to do something, and then you talk to people who are actually doing it, and they don't see the benefit that Google claims that will occur when you do that. So I think you always take what they say with a grain of salt for sure, because they may intend for things to work a certain way, but it's a complex algorithm, and I think sometimes they don't tweak things as they intend to, especially when there's as many people working on it as there is. So I think today, though, I think you can switch to SSL without any concern. But if you don't need to, it's not something where I think that you're going to get passed by just because your competitors have SSL and you don't. So if it's a brand new site, I would recommend you do it, because I think in the future, they've said already a few times that they may consider turning up the dial and making it more impactful. So it's better to have it. You can use a tool like Let's Encrypt. And on my host SiteGround, you can literally click 3 buttons and get that working very quickly. So it's really no cost or no headache to set up at this point. But if you have an existing site and you don't have a strong reason to do it, and you're ranking really well, I don't think you're going to be, I don't think you'll lose any traffic if you do it, but I don't think there's some gold rush awaiting for you on the other side once you actually do that. So have a plan for it. Maybe it's something that you do maybe during your low part of the seasonality of your business or something like that, or maybe it's something you do during your next redesign. But handling about a dozen of those over the past year, I think they fixed all the issues at this point, but I don't think that it's some magic boosting formula to start to grow your SEO traffic. I've yet to see a site switch to SSL and then see some slap shot up in organic traffic. I don't think it happens. We talked about site speed a minute ago. So, WordPress, maybe this is a little bit of a knock against it sometimes, certainly when you're abusing plugins, or Matt talked about these bloated page builders, and I do see these sites sometimes. Site speed can be an issue. And I think that it's not always necessarily directly a ranking factor per se, or if it is, I think it's very, very minor. But, if someone's researching, whatever you may be ranking for, whatever keyword you're optimizing for, and let's say you get that click, especially on mobile, let's say you get that tap, you get that visitor, and then you lose them on a slow site, you're just shooting yourself in the foot. So I think that ultimately that needs to be something that's part of your plan to improve. I think the goal should be to get your site to load in less than 2.5 seconds. I think that's a reasonable time frame. If you have a site that doesn't have much complex nature to it, like if your site's mostly a brochure site and there's a few images on it, I don't see why you couldn't get under 1.5 seconds, that sort of thing. So there's people more knowledgeable than me about how to actually go through and do that, but I think it should be part of your SEO process. And just like as a website owner, as your process for either your sites or clients, to go through and review that. Because I think that like Amazon, I think Jeff Bezos says this about Amazon, like customers never complained that a site was too fast. So why wouldn't you put a little bit of extra resources into something that's going to make, the users on your site happy? I think that's a good reason to spend a little bit of extra time on it. And last piece here on kind of the non-plugin related, but SEO related areas in WordPress would be schema.org markup. So if you have a local business that you're helping, I think you can use the local business schema markup in the footer of the site. On every page. That's been a useful exercise for me. I've rolled that out on a few sites in different verticals, but in the one that I work in most commonly, and I've seen a little bit of lift in local rankings from that. As far as all the other different schemas that have been, like I use the Genesis framework primarily for the sites that I work on, and as far as whether all the extra article ones and different breadcrumbs that Genesis has put in their framework have helped a lot. I don't have much feedback there. I think they look cool. When I put it in the Google Rich Snippet Tester, they give me all green check marks and they're telling me I'm doing everything right. I don't really think there's a strong ranking impact there, but you never know where things are going to go in the future. So I think if you're looking at where to add schema.org, if you're doing product reviews, that can be a helpful one because you'll get stars in the search results. I think that's a good one to help increase your click-through rate a little bit. If you're working with a local business, look at the local business type. So there's a few here and there that are helpful. And they're not necessarily directly WordPress related, although there are some plugins that'll help you a little bit. But you can always generate that code in a tool and then paste it in. I use one from Joe Hall that's like a JSON schema.org generator that works really well. Okay, so the last slide that I would like to cover here is just talking about what I think are the 2 best free tools that you can get. Of course, they're straight from Google, straight from the horse's mouth. And I think they're going to give you a lot of information once your site is live and established. So Google Analytics, Google Search Console, I almost said Webmaster Tools, they almost got me, are both very valuable because I think that you really can't get more accurate information. The information in Search Console can be a little misleading. It's not necessarily not accurate. It's just a little misleading. But in terms of Google Analytics and linking these together, I don't think you can get better data from any other tool. So, for example, if you look at your organic search traffic and your organic rankings in Search Console and compare them to a research tool like SEMrush or Ahrefs or something, you're still going to see pretty big discrepancies. Even though we like to use these third-party tools like SEMrush and Ahrefs, they are, at the end of the day, they're estimating. Whereas, your Search Console data that you have on, click-through rate and traffic and where your pages are ranking is, actually from Google's data. So they're not estimating, they're giving you real information. Just so you're aware, analytics keeps your data forever. Search Console only keeps your data for 90 days, which can be problematic if you're working with a client or you're starting to get in the space and you're hoping to show SEO success or improvements with a site that you're working on. You're only going to see that over a 90-day period unless you go and download that data. So before we get into the points here really quickly, highly recommend, of course, that you download your Search Console data every 90 days. Just put it in a Google Sheet so you have it. Maybe you'll never use it. I have backups for sites that are 2 or 3 years old that I've never looked at, but if I ever needed to, at least I would have it. So I would highly recommend that you save that Search Console data every 90 days at minimum. And I have scripts that run every month that back that up to Google Sheets. Like we talked about before, verify all the versions of your site. This one's kind of a quick one, and it's rare that I see problems here, but just make sure that if you have a secure and a non-secure version of your site, verify them both. If you have a non-www and a www version, verify all of them. Of course, one is the only one that should actually be indexed and getting traffic in Google, and the only one that someone can actually access. But every once in a while, there's a glitch in the matrix, there's a bug in Skynet or whatever, and the wrong type of page will get indexed. So you want to make sure you're getting all that data, and then add those as a set in Google Search Console. So it's just the verify all versions bullet point here is just for Search Console, not for analytics. Reporting on what's happening for me is not really a strategy. So although these are good reporting tools, these aren't really like tools that are going to help you improve your SEO strategy. They're just telling you what's happening. But if you don't know what's happening, I think it's hard to kind of decide what the next steps are. So I would recommend that you use these tools if you're an SEO, specifically Search Console, because I think it gives you a lot of information that you would not have otherwise. You could kind of dig through the left menu there and kind of explore and find out what's best for you. The most valuable report, or if I could only look at one report for a client site or my own personal site, it would be the queries report, because you can filter by page or by search query that we're getting traffic on to see the various stats on it in terms of impressions, clicks, your average position, that sort of thing. But it's not really a strategy. All it is that you need to know what's going on, so that if for me, what it most commonly means is if I find a post or a page that's doing really well in search but isn't getting a lot of traffic, it's sometimes less work to go from 8 to 4 than it is to try to go after a brand new keyword and go from non-existent to 4. So what I mean by that is, let's say when you go and review your Search Console data, you have a page that's getting 10,000 impressions every month in Google search, but it only got 100 clicks because you're ranking 10th or 11th. So you're kind of like on that cusp of kind of being valuable and getting some search traffic from it, but you're not ranking well yet. You'd be surprised how often clients think that they're getting some traffic from a page they're not really getting much traffic on just because they're on the first page. Being on the first page is kind of like, the minimum to even start to get a few visitors for a search term. There's lots of examples where just going from 8 to 4 is going to double, triple, your traffic, and going from 4 to 1 is of course going to be the big winner. So I think that it's easy to want to just keep creating new pages and getting new content out there. But if you're never working on optimizing your pages to move them up a few slots kind of within the framework of SEO best practices, then you're always going to be a little bit behind. So these are tools that help you see where that is and then kind of take action on what the best things to do are to improve that. Last thing on Search Console here, reviewing your technical issues is important. I think there are a few things that can take a site down and make it, really hurt the organic traffic that you can get really quickly. I think there's the two things that I would say there that you should look at right away. One would be any external broken links that you have. So let's say you've earned a link from a site in the past. You may have had nothing to do with it, but let's say it's a good link, and that's that inbound link is coming to a broken page or a page that's foreign. That's not something you want to have. So go through, redirect that page. Search Console will tell you all of your inbound links that are coming in and if those links are active or not. So definitely look at that, and it'll tell you which sites are linking to your sites as well. And this is another thing. Google has said before that they only count links that show in Google Search Console. So although I use these third-party tools a lot, like Ahrefs and like Moz Open Site Explorer, sometimes the links in those tools don't match what Google has. What Google has claimed is that the only ones they count are the ones in Search Console. So if you have Search Console access to a website, in theory, to look at your links, all you need to do is go download that table. You don't need to go to some of these third-party tools and pay a lot of money to see it. Now, we can probably debate whether that's accurate or not. Again, Google sometimes says things that aren't actually accurate, but it is a good free source of information you should look at what links Google does have pointing to your site. It's possible that some of these third-party tools miss those. So I would say definitely look there. And then the other thing, so the first one being broken external links, I think that's a quick win and something you can fix and see some benefit from it. And this is just, there's AJ Cohn wrote about this one time. He's kind of a prominent SEO that's worked on big sites like Airbnb and Pinterest. And he said that there's never been a time when he's gone and fixed internal 404s and he hasn't seen an immediate benefit from it. So if you have any internal pages on your site that are broken, I mean, that's, that could be like the worst experience. When you have an external link that's broken, you can't always control that, right? Like you may have linked to a site and at the time you linked to it, it was working properly. And then 2 years later, that person moved their site or they didn't do redirects, that sort of thing. So I don't think Google's going to give you too much flack for that. But if you have a broken internal link, that's just the worst experience for someone. And I think it really does harm your SEO. So if you have examples on your site internally where you can go and fix those 404s, I think Screaming Frog is actually the best tool to find those pages. Highly recommend that you crawl your site on like maybe every 45 days, maybe every 60 days or something to make sure that there's no internal links on your site or someone's like really excited. They're looking at a page on your site. They click to contact you and the link is broken. I've seen that one before. And I was like, oh man, what a quick win there. But any internal link that you may have on your site going to a different page on your site, those should all be returning 200. If there's some 301s, just take your time to fix those. But if there's any broken ones, that's something that you can put at the top of your to-do list, SEO wise. Fix those, and you're going to see some benefit from it. So those are my mini slides. Hopefully, it was helpful.
Hey everybody, I hope that was a super great lesson for you. If you're new to SEO, there's a wealth of knowledge there. If you've been doing SEO for some time, there's a wealth of knowledge there. Conrad's is a very smart guy. If you find him on Twitter, go ahead and thank him for doing this episode. Really appreciate it. Again, it's mattreport.com, mattreport.com/subscribe to join the mailing list. We'll see you in the next episode.